Andersonville is that way. And that's that pathetic little creek that runs through it that they were supposed to drink out of, bathe in, etc., etc. It's supposed to wash away all the effluent. It didn't. This is the current train station at Andersonville. I only put it up there because it's the same spot where they would have disembarked at this train station. Then they're marched off that way to the prison. I'm going to put together a little video some time ago, and it's not the best. It was done by taking my iPhone and taping it to the back of my rearview mirror. So that's what you're going to see. But the real pictures in here from the period are all from a man named A.J. Riddle, who came down from Macon. One day took 4 photos. Those are the only photos of Andersonville that exist. No matter what you hear or what you read, or you see emaciated people who were supposedly at Andersonville, none of it's real. I haven't been able to find anything except A.J. Riddle. A.J. Riddle also is famous for photographing Jefferson Davis when he was brought back to Macon. Anyway, here's a little video for you. And I got to turn on the speaker. It's not going to work. See this stuff floating around in front of me? If you can explain to me what that is, I'd like to know. No, it's not. I couldn't see it when I did it. They call it Andersonville. Father Abraham is here. We're all afraid to sleep, and some of us never will. Nothing to be nowhere around. We turn into animals in the night. Fires for me, they're made for every day. Trench for the grave is our fate. We signed up to fight. Now we fight each other for the crown. What's happened for you? We forget who we are and where we're from. So just let us go. We won't complain. Lord, just take us through. It doesn't matter who's to blame. We write no letters home. We hope they think we know. On the battlefield as heroes, my skeletons in this hell. On a train ride to hell, dirty creek in Monterey. They call it Father Abraham's love is here. We're all afraid to see. Some of us sleep here still. I love the fact that the monuments have been full dishonor on them. And every one of those monuments has soldiers who were there who defected to the Confederate Army. Every one of them. Because you would go there, say if you got there early or late February '64, which is when it opened, you would sit there and watch everybody you knew there die with you. Because the longer you were there, it increased the chances that you weren't leaving. So in January of '65, a man named O'Neill came around and said, I can get you out of here. I can get you food, I can get you clothing, all you have to do is sign this little paper. And lots of them did. And we'll see one of them later on in this presentation. They went to the Confederate Army. And a lot of them ended up in a place called Egypt, Mississippi, where they were given guns only when the battle ensued. They didn't trust them to have guns on their own. But they fired a couple volleys at the Union soldiers and then threw their guns away, jumped up and down and started screaming, "We're Union boys, we're Union boys." And the guys who captured them weren't real thrilled with them because they had just watched them kill a bunch of their friends. So they were taken to a place called Alton Prison in the middle of the Mississippi River, Alton, Illinois, and held there. They were going to execute them all. And President Lincoln said, no, we're not going to kill these boys. We're going to make them into a unit and send them out to the plains to fight the Indians who are running amok because we've taken all the army off, the Union Army away from the Plains Indians. So it ends up that these galvanized Yankees end up with a unit of Confederates who had signed the pledge the other way back in Camp Douglas, fighting side by side against the Indians. Anyway, this is kind of a side thing. But anyway, as you can see here, my research tells me that there's 778 Michigan boys still there. That I can say definitely they're Michigan boys. And 1,158 of them, I can say, were there and survived. So, here are the Eaton County dead at Andersonville. Anybody got a relative there? Good, we can go on. So I had to define what a survivor was before I could write this book. And it's any Andersonville POW enlisted in a Michigan regiment or a resident of Michigan at the time of enlistment who served from another state or federal unit who did not die at Andersonville before June 1st, 1865. So this includes people who were like sent off to Florence and died there, or to Savannah and died there, which was Camp Lawton. I investigated 1,185 men, which I found in the database at Andersonville, and 27 of those I could not confirm. I had to stop somewhere and say, if I can't put 2 pieces of information about a guy being there, then I'm going to leave them off. So I left 27 of them off. But there's still 1,185 guys in the book. And what I did was, I spent a lot of time at Andersonville on my first book, which is called Michigan at Andersonville, which talks about those 778 guys and how those graves are sometimes correct and sometimes not. And that book's upstairs, by the way. Keith always bought my books, but he always made sure that he never paid me anything more than I had paid to make the book. I don't know how he did it, but he did it every time. But anyway, we've got, so here, I'm not going to go through all these resources that you can see. Chris Barr gave me the National Park database when he was a ranger down there. And that set this whole thing off. Because I was down there, I actually went down there to hunt for guys from Buchanan, Michigan, because I had traced them in the 12th Michigan. They had been at Shiloh, captured, and were then taken to Camp Oglethorpe in Macon, Georgia. And my wife just happened to be working in Macon, Georgia at the time. And I thought, why do I want to stay here in Indiana where it snows? I could be in Georgia for the winter. So I go down there, and I tried to find these guys. And I talked the librarian at Buchanan into paying me while I did this. I got a winter vacation, got paid for it, and spent a lot of time at Andersonville trying to find these guys who had died at Oglethorpe but had been transferred to the National Cemetery in Andersonville. And while I was down there, I started looking at the guys, and I decided to do the guys who were actually there and died there. And when I started doing that, it was always in the back of my mind. It was always in the back of my mind. What happened to the guys who survived this hell? What they did? They ate corn cobs, chewed up corn cobs, which lacerated their large intestines, which means they had diarrhea the rest of their lives, because scar tissue will not absorb the water back into your body. That's just one of the maladies. A lot of them died of stomach cancer because they were eating things that shouldn't have been eaten. I mean, any bird that happened to land in the Andersonville prison was immediately killed and eaten raw. So it's amazing that only 25%, or so they say, of those who were at Andersonville actually died there. I kind of don't believe that, because you can't really tell who all was there, because they emptied the prison once and then brought some guys back and sent them all to Florida once at the end of the war. Quincy Gilmore, Major General in the Union Army, said, I can't do anything with those guys, send them back to prison. So he sent them back to Andersonville. Can you imagine? In October, they sent them all off to Camp Lawton near Savannah, which was a paradise compared to Andersonville. Plenty of water, baked ovens, lots of food, and then, you know what happened at Savannah? Sherman showed up. So they took all the prisoners from Camp Lawton and sent them, guess where? Back to Andersonville. Christmas Eve, 1864, they all show up back in hell. But they didn't go straight to hell. They went to a place called Blackshear, and then to Valdosta, and all, like, they took a tour of Georgia before they came back, and they would just be out in the middle of the field. They get off the train, sit in the middle of the field, guards all around them, get back on the train, go somewhere else. Ended up back in Andersonville. Anyway, I am getting off the, I guess we should have a target, shouldn't we? Or this will take all night. Those are some more of the sources, and I can't tell you how much I enjoy Ancestry. I know it's expensive, but I would not have been able to do any of this without it. Because you can, you know those brown books that tell you about all the guys in from Michigan? You go on Ancestry, you can search those brown books. You're looking for one soldier, you can search them. You know what? How long that would take with the actual books? Forever. And you give up. Anyway, so those are some of the online resources. A year of death of Andersonville survivors, obviously 64 and 65, there were a lot of them because they went to other prison camps and died there. But you can see they reach all the way into the 1940s. So my thought was, you know, and I think everybody's thought was that the guys who survived Andersonville were just 85 pounds, completely sick, came home and died. And that is just not true. It's just not true. If you look at this, the average, if you look at the average year of death for these guys, and include the 64, 65 deaths, you still get 1897. And if you get rid of those 2 years, it's 1909. The average year of death of these Andersonville survivors. So the average age of an Andersonville survivor, Michigan, was 61 years of age when he died. In 1850, in the United States, if you were born in 1850, which means you missed the war, and you live to be 20 years of age, you could expect to live 40.1 more years, exactly the same as an Andersonville child. That statistic just blows me away. Here's some of the maladies that they reported. A lot of these guys got pensions, and they were, depending on how bad off you were, if you lost a finger, you got $2 a month. If you were completely insane and couldn't do anything, you got like $20 a month. But they would report. So you get their life maladies there, and then the causes of death. And admittedly, we're talking about, early medical history here. But amazingly, other than different names for diseases, these doctors knew what was going on. They really did. This is the one that scares me. 3 times as many people die now as did Andersonville survivors of cancer. But some of these things have disappeared. Diarrhea, you don't die from diarrhea anymore. They did. Okay, so a little review here. What was the best way to get to Andersonville from Michigan? It was to ride with Custer. That's how you got to Andersonville. The best way. At Trevilian Station, he decided he was going to attack the Confederate Army, which was marching down the road, down the hill from him. He had a brigade. Okay, let's talk about 3,000 to 5,000 men, maybe, and probably not in 1864, probably 1,500. And he's watching 2 divisions of Confederate cavalry go up. Divisions include brigades. So you're looking at being outnumbered at least 10 to 1. So what does George do? He charges. He wants, and this is the really crazy part, he wants to capture the baggage train of the Confederate generals so he can have their uniforms. He ends up having his baggage train taken. And lots and lots, 297 I think is the number of Michigan boys who went off to, and at that time, Custer was in charge of only Michigan boys. 1st, 5th, 6th, and 7th Regiment of Cavalry. So that's Trevilian Station. And Stoneman's raid to Macon. George Stoneman was a cavalry commander, and he talked General Sherman in Atlanta that while they were north of Atlanta, that he would go south of Atlanta and cut the railroad, cut the lifeline so that John Bell Hood's army would starve to death. That's what Stoneman told Sherman. What Stoneman really wanted to do was go down to Macon and let all the Union officers held prisoner there. He wanted to liberate them. Well, he got down to Macon, found out that he couldn't do anything with the defenses of Macon, and he took his 3 cannon that he had and shelled Macon for a while and then left. Well, the problem was there were cavalry in his front going back, and there were infantry in his rear catching up with him. And he thought, oh my God, I got a mess here. So what he did was he split his group in 2, told half of them, take off and save yourself, and that he would fight off the Confederates by himself. Well, he fought for about 10 minutes and surrendered. So Stoneman ended up in the prison at Macon, Camp Oglethorpe, was he was trying to liberate. All the rest of his men ended up in Andersonville. So those are the 2 biggest, or the easiest ways to get from Michigan to Andersonville. So we're going to get into some of these guys. Thomas Byrd Sr. in April of 65, and I should point out that Chris really told me about this man, amazing story. He found out that his son was at a camp called Parole Camp at Annapolis, Camp Parole, and he had been in Andersonville taken to Camp Parole, and it was nothing more than hospitals. They were just trying to get people well again. Thomas Byrd found Thomas Byrd Jr. at Annapolis, and he weighed about 90 pounds. Couldn't walk. Thomas Byrd picked him up, put him in a carriage, took him to the train station, put him on the train, took him home to Groveland. Unfortunately, he didn't make it to Toledo and died in the train, on the train. Now, Vedder Sprague, he heard his son was at Andersonville in early May, and he took off. He took off on a train to try to get to Andersonville. And he made it. Some just amazing way he made it to Andersonville after all the tracks had been torn up and everything else. It was the end of the war. And he got to Andersonville and said, "What's going on? Where's my son?" They said, "Oh, we took him to Macon." Well, Vedder had just gone through Macon to get to Andersonville. So he turns around and goes back, and he talks to, that's Thomas Bird Jr.'s unique headstone, and that's Camp Crowell. And I owe Chris for that picture. He talks to George Raney, who is the surgeon for the 2nd Michigan Cavalry, who is on the other side of these trees is the camp. It's now a cemetery. At that time, it was the camp. And see, so after, Vedder says, "Where's my boy?" And George said, "He's over in the cemetery." This is Rose Hill Cemetery, but this is the black section of Rose Hill Cemetery. And when the Confederates had Union dead from the prison war camps, they put them in the black section of Rose Hill Cemetery, which was called Oak Ridge. And somewhere along here, I met with a couple people who put together a cemetery catalog, an outline of the cemetery. And they were in their 90s. And I found it at the Middle Georgia Archives. And I said, "Are these people still around?" And they said, "Yeah." So we called them up. I went over there. The guy was amazing. He collected automobile parts. Now, just not normal automobile parts, but automobile parts from before 1920. His garage was full of automobile parts. But anyway, he said, "I want to show you something." And I go in the back, and he brings out a gun. And I said, "Okay." He goes, "This is the only Griswold gun we know about around here." Griswold was a manufacturer who made guns for the Confederates that Sherman's army had burned the factory. And he had one of the Griswold. Anyway, but he had done the outline, and somewhere along here were Sprague's body laid to rest. But in 1867, the Union, I should say the U.S. Army showed up and said, "We're going to move all those guys to Andersonville," which they did. But he was moved on a specific date, and those 4 graves there at Anderson were built on that date. Who knows which one of them is he's one of them. Anyway, George Raney, if you don't know about him, he's a very famous Michigan surgeon. He's one of the first doctors to figure out that you shouldn't be going to the bathroom and drinking out of the same water source. Something tells me somebody thought of that before him. Okay, so some famous Michigan survivors of Andersonville. This is the most famous survivor of Andersonville today. You know, all know who this man is? Have you read his diary? I'm going to tell you something you probably won't like. If you like the diary was written for a reason. And that reason was in the 1890s, the Southerners were starting to get back into national politics. And everybody who was at Andersonville and was in the GAR did not want this to happen. So all these books came out about the horrors of what the Confederates did to our Union boys. Don't let them back into national politics. And he was one of them. Not to say it doesn't have worth, but he exaggerated a lot. And if you really want to know what went on at Andersonville, read this man's book. Because he was there from the beginning. He was a sergeant. He met with Wirtz. He knew what Wirtz was like. He spent 2 years talking to Wirtz, who ran the prison. He knew that Wirtz had tried to get lumber to dam up that stupid little creek so that they'd have a pond to bathe in. And when the lumber got there, the Georgia militia who was guarding the camp stole the lumber and built huts out of it because Wirtz only had authority inside the prison. He had no authority of anything outside the prison. So he had tried to do that. He had tried to improve their food, and the food was stolen by the Georgia militia. When it showed up, oh, this is good stuff, we'll take this. And then the Georgia militia camp was upstream from the prison, so they were adding goodies to the water. Yeah, anyway, so this is a much better read. And he was there, and he's factual about it. He really was upset that nobody really told the true story of Andersonville in Wirtz, and that Wirtz was not a horrible guy. He never beat anybody with his pistol with his right hand because his right hand was crippled at Malvern Hill. So he couldn't. In fact, when they had his trial, and the guys told the stories about him doing things, he was actually in Switzerland visiting doctors trying to get his arm to work. So he was railroaded without a doubt. I think he had, what was it, 4 or 5 different attorney teams because they kept quitting because of what the Army was doing. First of all, the Army had no right to even try this man. He was not an American. He was not a U.S. in the U.S. Army. He was a civilian. But anyway, so we've got John Ransom. Also, one of the things about John Ransom was he was a printer, so it was kind of easy to get his book out. He actually moved to Pasadena, California at the end of his life. Lived to be 76. James Madison Page, a little sidelight about James is I was on my way out to visit my daughter in Seattle in our motorhome, and I thought, this man surveyed most of Montana and was instrumental in bringing the railroad to Montana. And I knew that he had founded a town called Pageville, but they had changed the name to Two Bridges. So I put in my little GPS and said, we're going to go see Two Bridges. Because I just stopped at Fort Abraham Lincoln. Very disappointed that they didn't know who Orlando Moore was, who had been at Fort Abraham Lincoln, and had actually led the troops out from the Little Bighorn to bring Custer's men back, the survivors. Anyway, they didn't know. So I was there. So I'm headed for Two Bridges. I'm following the GPS, going down the road. Road's getting narrower. And then farm field. I'm going like this. And finally, the road disappeared. And I go to the GPS and I look. I expanded it 20 miles on a road that no longer existed to get to Pageville. I said, no, not going to do that. Anyway, James Madison Page was born in Pennsylvania. Ran away from home because his mother married a cruel man who beat him. And he lived with his uncle until he was 13. And he enlisted in Company A of the 6th Cavalry. You know who was in charge of that? Mr. Custer. He was taken POW at Liberty Mills, Virginia in September of '63 and was held at Libby, Belle Isle, Andersonville, and Millen. Millen was Camp 1 near Savannah. He was discharged at Fort Leavenworth, went and got a business college degree, and returned to Fort Leavenworth and headed west, and he was almost killed by Indians. But he arrived in Montana, settled in Lower Beaver Head Valley, and founded Pageville. And went to work as a government contract surveyor, and he worked in every county in Montana. He finally this is ridiculous. He was postmaster to Pageville. He was a 2-term state legislator, president of the Montana Mining Engineers, trustee of the State Orphans Home, president of Montana Pioneer Society, influential in bringing the railroad to Montana. He retired to Long Beach, California, and died in 1924 at 85. So he wasn't exactly emaciated. He came home and died. This guy, we're not going to go through these like this. This man is pretty amazing. He moved out to California and became a botanist and found hundreds of new species of plants. And his wife was a painter. She went along with him and painted descriptions of the plant. He lived to be 76. He's buried in Mountain View. He was discharged at Good Old Camp Chase in Columbus. I'm not going to go into that. Whoops. What happened? You're getting a backwards slideshow. Come on. Okay, here's Lawrence Woodenbacher. I love Lawrence. Lawrence makes me happy. He came home. He nearly starved to death. He was held at Athens, Savannah, Millen, Blackshear, and Andersonville. He survived the Sultana explosion. He got married in Mount Clemens, moved to Macomb County, then he moved to Lenox, Macomb County, and became a grocer. And they asked him why he wanted to be in the grocery business. And he said, so I can go downstairs and eat whatever the hell I want whenever I want. And he died in 1913 of anemia in New Haven. And this is, you get to listen to me on tape. This is what he wrote about the Sultana.
Boat was loaded with 2,300 Union prisoners who were looking north at Camp Chase, Ohio. After we left Memphis, it began raining and continued to do so all night. When 8 miles above Memphis, between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, the boilers of the boat exploded. I awoke with a start, and the next moment the boat was on fire and all was as light as day. The wildest confusion followed. I was on the hurricane deck, clear aft. This part of the boat was jammed with men. I saw the pilot house and hundreds of them sink through the roof into the flames, at which juncture I sprang overboard into the river. I swam 7 miles down the river and into a drift, where I caught onto a log and waited assistance.
Amazing. This guy has always been in my group that I talk to everybody about, and he happens to be from Eaton Rapids, wherever that is. Because taken prisoner at Spotsylvania in May of '64, he was mustered out and served at Andersonville. And he was so horrified by what he saw at Andersonville that he became a doctor. He went to Chicago, Illinois, to Hahnemann Medical College, married Fannie Mosier in Chicago, and returned to practice medicine in Eaton Rapids. He died in Eaton Rapids at the age of 88. He's buried in Rose Hill Cemetery, and if you want to see him, he's upstairs on the wall. He was a member of the Brainerd Clubs. This is Reinhard Frank. Reinhard Frank was a German. I don't think he spoke any English, quite frankly. They even promoted him sergeant. He was born in Bavaria. Discharged at Camp Chase. He was a boot and shoemaker, and he lived in Adrian. And he's buried under the name George Reinhard Frank. And that's his house on Frank Street in Adrian. It's still there. Joseph Keene. Joseph Keene was held at Andersonville, and at Andersonville, in the summers when it was harvest time, the soldiers were loaned out to plantation owners, because the plantation owners had to give 10% of their slaves to the Confederate war effort, so they didn't have enough people to bring in the crops. So they would borrow these guys. I can imagine these guys, it was okay, because they were getting fed, when they did the work on the plantation. Well, Joseph Keene was in a plantation near Macon, Georgia, and he escaped. He worked his way all the way to Atlanta, and at that time the Union lines were north of Atlanta, and worked his way through the Confederate Army and back to the Union Army. And when he got back, he went to General Sherman and told him everything he had seen about the Confederate side, where the troops were, et cetera, et cetera. And came back and became a Detroit bookkeeper. And he worked at the Detroit Oak Belting Company, which I have no idea what it was. But he traveled extensively, never owned a home. He always lived in an apartment. But he died in 1926 at the age of 83. He was buried at Elmwood. He, in 1899, received the Medal of Honor for reporting on the rebel troops' deployment while he was returning to the Union Army. Marvin Bogart from Greenfield Township in Oakland County. There's only one thing really interesting about Marvin, and that his wife was a cousin of Mrs. Henry Ford. And in the 19 teens, Henry Ford's chauffeur shows up at Marvin's house with a car. Says, "Here, have a car. I'm going to show you how to drive." So he retired and was living with his son LaRue in Novi, and he finally died at the age of 98 of bronchial pneumonia. I include this guy just because he's buried 3 miles from my house down in Mishawaka. But the interesting about Jake Wade is that he was a ne'er-do-well. He was a farm laborer, 7 children. But what he did was he ran a sample room. Anybody know what a sample room was? Sample.
I was just going to say it's like a walking room.
Nope, better than that. He would bring in samples from all the local brewers and distillers, because the people who bought stuff for hotels and clubs didn't want to go to the bars if you could get killed in the bars. So he brought them to his living room. His wife made him a nice dinner, and he sat there and drank and decided which one he wanted to buy. It was a sample room. And like I said, he died in 1915. He's buried in St. Joseph Catholic Cemetery in Mishawaka. And I put that little Andersonville survivor thing on the flag when I found it. Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but when you're ready to take a break, you can take a break.
Okay, I'm going to get through these before we do the, I'm almost done with the really important ones. We'll get to the Eaton County ones after the break.
Perfect.
Okay. Joseph Douglas, amazing thing about him was he's a self-taught engineer, and he built most of the bridges in Iowa. That's what he did after the war. He died in 1891. Joseph Stevens came home from the war to find that his entire family had died of cholera, except his older sister, who was married. And he started a business with his brother-in-law. And he had boarded the Sultana with another brother-in-law, William Finch. And William Finch died trying to get into a lifeboat and was killed by the ones who were already in. Because they didn't want anybody else in there capsizing the lifeboat. So they killed everybody who tried to get in. One of the uglier things about the Sultana is that you don't hear in there. He returned to Oakdale, found most of his family had died. Moved to Buffalo, New York, and entered the livestock business with his brother-in-law, and was Dunning and Stevens. He died in 1919 in East Buffalo, New York, as a very wealthy man. Charles Carson, you can decide for yourself whether he was successful or not. He was a politician. He was a 2-term congressman. Third time he ran, it was very close, so they had to do a recount, and he lost by 1 vote. But the president at the time, I believe it was Cleveland, Grover Cleveland, made him an associate justice of the Supreme Court of the Oklahoma Territory, and he served until 1899 when he returned to Kansas City for his law practice. And he died in 1920 at age 74. Now, we talked about the most famous Andersonville survivor. Now, this is the most famous Andersonville survivor in 1900. This guy, I have to tell you how I found him. I could not find him in any census. He is in no census anywhere. I found him before he went to war. I found him in the Army. Nothing afterwards. Absolutely nothing. And so in desperation, I just Google his name. right? You just give up, say, okay, Google, you find it. What Google found was a book in Philadelphia at an antique bookstore with an inscription to James Carhart from blah, 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 who acted with my husband. He was an actor. He traveled everywhere. And that's why he didn't show up in any census. He was never anywhere. He was always everywhere. He, let's see, I think they said, so this is from Who's Who in the Stage in 1908. It lists everything. He's played every place he's played. He got married, but she died of breast cancer. She was another actor. He even claims to have met Lincoln when he was in Virginia. And he was with the 5th Cavalry, which is Custer's boys, and he was taken prisoner at Trevilian Station, which we've already talked about. Spent 3 months in Libya and 9 months in Andersonville and Millen. And he also survived the Sultana. So, but that's not the most amazing thing about James Lafayette Carter. I did finally find him in a census. And the census was in 1930. He was living in an actor's hotel in New York City. And you know, you can see who else is in the hotel, because they did it floor by floor. Everybody else on his floor was a 20-year-old woman. Now we know how he died. He's actually buried in Arlington Cemetery. Okay, the last person of note is this guy. And he's not notable. It's just, he rode with Custer. He was at Andersonville. He tried to escape, according to him. Got drugged back by the dogs. We won't go there, but those dogs didn't mutilate anybody. They were trained to bring slaves back. Slaves were worth $3,000 at the time of the Civil War. So you didn't train your dog to go out and maul something that was worth $3,000. So they would circle around you and keep you where you were. If you tried to leave, they would manage you. But they just kept you there and waited. And a lot of these guys who were caught by the dogs, when they came and found them, they were actually playing with the dogs. But the dogs wouldn't let them go in. Anyway, this is George Stafford. He was at Andersonville, tried to escape, blah, blah, blah. Was at the Washack, where he learned how to barber, because he had tried painting houses and the fumes got to him, so he became a barber. But anyway, and then he moved to Kalamazoo, and he was, like I said, in Custer's cavalry, the 6th and the 5th Michigan Cavalry. John Neal, again, taken at Trevilian Station. So, in 1910, he was 70 years old and still harboring. And so, he's also the first documented case of the Spanish flu. The first person in Kalamazoo to die of the Spanish flu. That makes sense, because he was a barber. But that's not the weird stuff about George. The weird stuff about George, he's a black man. How the hell did he get in Custer Cavalry? How did he get to Andersonville and survive? Because the first thing they did at Andersonville, if you were black, they either killed you or put you on a chain gang. Or sold you back into slavery, whether you'd ever been there or not. But you didn't stay in the prison in the stockade at Andersonville if you were black. And this man is black. Just amazing how he did this.
Did you get a soldier's description, or was he dark and complected, or was he? I assume he passed.
There's a sense there are no 100% black people in this country. None. I think, who was the guy who was doing all the "This Is Your Life" thing?
Louis Gage.
Gage. He did Emmett Smith, the cowboy, Dallas Cowboy Ranch. He was like 92%. He was the most he'd ever seen. The most black person that they had ever tested. Anyway, here's his census. It says right there, he's a black man. In this one, he's a mulatto. And this is his draft record of he and his brother Martin single. What's it say? What's it says? He's colored. How did he do it? And you know what happened to Martin? Martin served in the 1st Michigan Colored Troops. So I don't know how sports do. I really don't. And you look at him, he looks black. Yeah. He looks like a black. I don't get it. Okay, let's take a break and we'll talk about the Eaton County Boys after I get it. He wrote the best thing in That's great. Here's $50. Now you're happy.
I don't even know where to begin. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on at the museum. I'm sure you've all seen the new ship display that we got. That's been here about a month. It came from the library up in Bad Axe. They're remodeling their library and didn't have room for it, so they got a hold of us and said, "Hey, do you want this ship displayed?" Doggone it, we had to say yes. Took 2 trips up there to get it. One trip to get all the stuff that was in it, and then another trip to get the cabinet itself. And everything in there is handmade, including the cabinet. To get it in the building, we had to cut a header out of the door, because it wouldn't fit through the door. So obviously, we wanted it pretty badly. One of our concerns when it was offered to us was, well, we're not really a Civil War museum. They're Civil War ships, and how do we balance that? And one of the people on our board, a young lady named Kira O'Donnell Allen, no relation to me, did some research last weekend. She found a GAR member out of Charlotte that served with Admiral Farragut. So there's a naval tie there to the Grand Army. So we can make that story. We can make that connection. That's what we're all about, is trying to tell the story of the Grand Army and the things that they accomplished. So you notice that the new display in the front room of the Civil War, we moved the Civil War display into the front room to make room for this cabinet. The music display, some of you probably haven't seen in its new position. It was over on the wall over here. Another thing that we're focusing on is some marketing ideas. So we have these tumblers. There's 2 different ones that we have for sale. They're $25 a piece. There's a limited quantity of them, but you can pre-order them if you want. We can take cash, check, or credit cards. If you'd like one of those, you can see Dave in the back there. We also, another thing that we're kind of excited about, and I'll pass these around because they're kind of hard to see. These are key rings that are patterned after an original 1911 GAR lapel pin. We have the lapel pins for sale, and then we also had these keychains created by a lady in Owasso that makes them for us. Those are a very limited quantity right now because we just started ordering them. So if you want to pre-order something, one of those or all of them, they're $6 a piece, and you can talk to Dave about that as well. So as most of you know, who's not been here before? Okay, just real briefly, this is the original building that the veterans built in 1886. They met upstairs, and we have the upstairs set up like they would have used it for their meetings. And even to this day, one of the Allied orders, the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, meet up there. And it's set up just like they would have had it. So you make sure you get up there and take a look. When you hit the top of the stairs, I followed several people up to the top of the stairs, and I've heard exclamations that I won't repeat here, but it's like, wow. And that's what we're about, is creating that wow factor for people that love this history and people that want to learn this history. So that being said, we're funded by donations and sponsorships. So presentations like this, John has his book for sale, $50. If you'd like to order or purchase one of those from him tonight, he has a few more available. He still have people lined up here to buy them. And I'm going to pass the hat. Don't feel obligated. I caught Chris with his mouth full. And that being said, I'll turn it back to John, and thank you all very much.
Okay, so this is where you get involved. There are 45 men in my book that have ties to this county. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you all about every one of them in detail, but if you see an ancestor or you see somebody that you want to know more about, we will do that because this is for you. Okay? So there they are. Anybody see an ancestor? Okay. That was founded in 1860. You see there's no Hamlin Township. It was all Reddick's Township then. I put this up here because I wasn't the least bit familiar with your county when I started this. So I didn't know where these things I was talking about, and I didn't even know how to pronounce it. It's Calumet, right? Okay. Anyway, so those are the 15 townships, and these are the, I can't call them cities, they're more like just settlements. See, they're just, well, there were only 16,000 people in this county in 1860. So this you know today as Diamonddale, but then it was Diamondville because this man owned the land, and over there. So you've got 7 guys from Bellevue, 6 from Charlotte, 4 from Olivet, 4 from Eaton Rapids, 4 from Grand Glen, 2 from Diamonddale, 1 from West Windsor. There are 45 guys, though, so that most of them did not live in the little settlements. They lived out in the township on farms. So we're going to start with Sherman Andrus, and I put this little thing up there so I could show where he lived in relationship to the county. That's what that strange thing is. He was a student at the School of Medicine when he joined the 8th Cavalry. That was Stoneman's grade to Macon. And he enlisted in Walton Township, taken at Stoneman grade, and in 1870 he came home and he was a druggist. He moved to Ohio for some unknown reason, and in 1899 entered the Dayton Soldiers' Home. He was 5'7" with gray hair and blue eyes. and he died in 1913 and buried in the Dayton VA Cemetery. William Bailey, also the 8th Michigan Cavalry, was born in New York. In 1880, he was a carpenter in Oneida. He operated a music store in Oneida. He's buried in Oakwood Avenue Cemetery in Grand Lake. John Bowers, also the 8th Michigan Cavalry, Sunshine Church, which is Stoneman's Raid. He died at Camp Parole, the same place that we saw Edgar Sprague. It was a recuperative camp after the war, like Camp Chase in Columbus, Ohio. And he's buried there in Annapolis National Cemetery. Didn't find a grave, a wonderful thing. Go out there and find tombstone. Warren Griffin, also the 8th Michigan Cavalry. He was from Walton Township, and he was exchanged, but he died in Pulaski. No, I never know. Is it Pulaski or is it Pulaski? If you go down to Hoosierville, it's Pulaski. You go to Tennessee, it's Pulaski. You go to Poland, I have no idea. Pulaski. And he's buried in Stones River National Cemetery in Murfreesboro. Hey, you know, anytime you want to speak up during this, just go ahead. Let it rip. You got questions? This is for you. Simon Hager, once again, the 8th Michigan Cavalry. He ended up in Bellevue as a carpenter in 1870, and then in Sunfield Township. So he got 2 of those silly little diagrams. He's buried out in California. Died in Fresno. He was also moved to Kansas before he went to California. Here's last Oscar Hawkins. Now, he was one of Custer's men, but he was also taken on Stoneman Raid because he switched units after being with our boy George for a while. He married Mary Jane Klaus in Eaton County. He was a farm laborer in Vermontville. His kids were born in Charlotte. He's buried in Maplehill Cemetery in Charlotte. George Fed, 7th Michigan Cavalry, another one of Custer's boys taken at Trevilian Station. From 1890 to 1920, he was farming in Walton Township. And he died in this barn of a stroke. Amazing thing about these guys is they farmed well into their 80s. It's amazing. People dying of heart attacks in their barn are 85 years old. Another 8th Michigan Cavalry, Alfred Hilliker. He was a farmer in 1880 in Brookfield Township. He died in Point City. Here's Amos Heaney, another one of good old Custer's boys, Trevilian Station. In 1873, he was in Vermontville. In 1894, his wife Augusta died in Olivet. He's buried. He died in Chicago, but they brought him back to Olivet City Cemetery. Heinrich Henry Legge, although it says Legger on his tombstone. Being from Germany, I'm pretty sure it's Legge. 1883 was in Bellevue. He's getting $8 a month for a pension, but he had TB. You know what they called it back then? So, there you go. He died in 1896 in Bellevue, and he's buried in Bellevue. George Noble, another one of Stoneman's boys. He was born here in Eaton Rapids and enlisted in Jackson from here. In 1880 to 1900, Hamlin Township, retired in Eaton Rapids. Wife died in Eaton Rapids. He moved to Florida, where he died of heart failure in 1929, and was brought back to Oakwood Cemetery. William Rogers, another of the Stoneman boys. You see the little continuation here of where all these guys were. Yeah, he married Helen Willis in Walton Township. He was a farm laborer in Walton Township. 1890, he was back. He was back on the Willis farm. He was an orphan, and he was taken in by these Willis people. And apparently, and this happens a lot, Guys move away, have farms, other places, and then come back. Obviously, what happens is the parents die, they inherit the farm, they come back. He was deaf in 1890, and he managed the Helen Bryant estate in Albion. Does anybody know what that is? Is it a big deal? Apparently not. He died in Michigan Soldiers' Home in Grand Rapids. John Simpson, he was in 2 regiments under Mr. Custer. He got married in Grand Ledge, farmed in Belton Township. He's buried. He built the center of Grand Ledge.
Comment.
Sure.
That last guy,
Yeah.
John F. Simpson kept a diary when he was in Andersonville.
Ah.
During the big reunion, Custer's guys in about 1902, 1903, he quoted from it. And so I met a descendant. And for years, the 2 of us teamed up together to try to find out whatever happened to that lost diary of Andersonville. She promised to give it to me when it turned up. We're still looking.
No. Joseph Leon Smith, another of Stoneman's boys, is a farm labor. Is it Carmel or is it Carmel? Carmel Township? Carmel Township? Nobody? Carmel. Indiana, it's Carmel. California, it's Carmel. I don't trust any state that calls a town Charlotte. And I'm from a state that calls a town for sale. Oh, gosh. Anyway, so he was a farm laborer. He didn't survive the war either. He was cancer and Whitman, southward. Here's a guy who was in one of Custer's and then joined the 9th. Was captured when he was in the 9th at Stone Mountain, exchanged at Venus Point. As a school teacher in Oneida, and then from 1890 to 1913 lived in Grand Ledge, pipe failure, and buried in Grand Ledge. And he was a quartermaster sergeant, which means he got everything to eat he ever wanted. Nathaniel Space, another one of Custer's boys. I hear somebody say
Nathan Space, yes.
okay. Enlisted at 7th Cavalry from Delta Center. Trevilian Station again, changed at Venus Point, and was in Camp Parole, Maryland. In Delta and Grand Ledge, and died of pleurisy in 1960. So these guys are not, they're not coming back and dying right away. They're having lives, they're having children.
Oh,
Yep.
comment about Nathan Space. To keep the story, his father was a pioneer settler in Eaton County. Fell in love with 2 Dutch girls. They were sisters. He couldn't decide which one he wanted to marry. So he legally married one, and the other one moved on to his farm property in a separate house he built for her. He had families by both women. One of his children was Nathan Space here. Nathan apparently, as a young man, had religion, and he was kind of shocked by what his dad did. So he moved out to Iowa. And when the Civil War came along, he joins the regiment out there. After the war, he comes back home to Eaton County.
He was orphaned in Iowa. So was Nathaniel's dad named Albert?
Oh, I forget. I have to check my notes.
Who is it? George Sweeney, 2nd Michigan Cavalry. Yay! Not a Custer boy, not a Stoneman boy. He was 1860 in Charlotte, born in Ireland, was taken captive at Chickamauga, exchanged, returned, and was a night watchman at his father's hotel in Clinton County. He ended up in the Michigan Soldiers' Home where he died of kidney disease. And I hate that they put blue stuff on it. Whoever does the stuff at the Veterans Cemetery. Okay, James Swift, 8th Cavalry, another Stoneman boy, was born in Bellevue. He was a farmer in Alamo. Died of a stroke in Charlotte. Very Maple. Richard Townsend, another one of Chester's boys. He's from Berry County, and then Kalamazoo County, and then Trevilian Station, and then it was at Andersonville, taken to Lawton, back to Andersonville. 1880 he was back in Vermontville. He died at Nashville in Berry County. Chester Upham, Alamo Township in 1860. Stoneman's raid again, but he never came back. He moved to Marshall. Alfred Wiley, one of Stoneman's boys, was from Bellevue. Died of TB in Bellevue. This enlisted in January 25th, 1865, in the 10th Tennessee Cavalry CSA. So he's one of those boys who's sitting at Andersonville going, I'm going to die. I'm going to die just like all my friends. And this O'Neill guy comes along and says, I'll give you a gun, and I'll give you food, and I'll give you a uniform, and he quit. And you know what? He came back, and apparently nobody gave him any food about it.
What's the return undocumented?
Well, I don't know how he got back.
Okay.
I don't know whether he was captured at Egypt, Mississippi. I don't know anything about him. Nothing else out there. We don't know how he went from being a Confederate soldier to marrying Susan Copeland in Bellevue. John Bissell Jr., 3rd and 5th Michigan Infantry, so these were way from Custer and Stoneman. He was severely wounded at Gettysburg. In 1900, he was in Grand Ledge, where he died in 1909. Bryce Bond, 24th Michigan Infantry. The most famous Michigan regiment, no doubt. I don't know if he was at Gettysburg or not. You can never tell, unless they're wounded or they're killed, whether they were actually there. He could have been in a hospital somewhere in Philadelphia. We just don't know. He was with the 24th at the time, but we don't know if he was on the field. He was actually taken prisoner at Battle of the Wilderness, became a picture dealer in Chicago, and then a stonecutter, and then he was in the Milwaukee Soldiers Home, then the Dayton Soldiers Home, then back to the Milwaukee Soldiers Home. Now, this brings me to the Soldiers Home deal. There's a few Rebecca who were in the Soldiers Home. You could go to any other Soldiers Home you wanted. Free. Get on the train, go to anywhere you wanted. A very popular Soldiers Home was in Los Angeles. Sawtell Veterans Hospital. Lots of Michigan soldiers end up at Sawtell because it's nice. They also, weirdly enough, end up on the other side of Puget Sound from Seattle, on the opposite side. There's a Soldiers Home there, and I visited that Soldiers Home when I was out in Seattle, and there are all these graves. So all these guys I knew. Really weird. But anyway, you could just get on the train and go to anyone you want. 18th Michigan Infantry, he was in Chester Township. He was paroled in Lake City, Florida, and discharged at Camp Parole. He never did come back. Theodore Davis was in the 1st Michigan. This is the 1st Michigan after the 3 months. This is the 1st Michigan 3 years. And he was an 1880s farmer in Bellevue. And he carried in Louisa. He lived until 1940. Andrew Face, 1st Michigan sharpshooter. Very famous regiment. If you've ever been to the Capitol, you should check out the statue. Anyway, he was from Hillsdale, but he ended up dying in Diamondville. Was there, my question to you, was there a Soldiers Home in Diamondville? Because this guy has no reason to be there that I can see. He was in Indiana, then Lansing, and then he died in Diamondville.
Can you
Anyway.
talk real quick about the very beginning, where it was born in Michigan as Andrew M. Stevens?
Father and mother.
Oh,
Father Andrew, mother patient.
I said that because that's my first name.
Nice to meet you, Andrew.
That's my
All right, who we got here? William Hertzberger. He was born in Germany. I just wonder how many of these German guys actually spoke English. But mostly they hung out in German enclaves, and a lot of these companies were German soldiers. But anyway, he was from Eaton. He immigrated to Eaton Rapids from Germany and enlisted here. In 1890, he was back here, and that's it. He moved on to Lansing and continued on.
Movie is captured at the crater.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
When you're doing your research where they're captured, does it give details or just captured? That's it. No details.
There's no.
Like that sharpshooter guy, I was curious how he got captured in Petersburg trenches there.
Yeah, well, they were overrun. They were left out to dry. They had a lot of success, took over some of the line, some of the entrenchments, and they were just left there for the counterattack to come. They ended up, there were a lot of Company K Indians there. They ended up burying their flag so that the Confederates couldn't get them because they knew they were going to prison.
So that kind of details from the battle report for the operation.
Yeah, it does. It's not going to come in
There.
Yeah. Not unless you go to the National Archives and ask for their records, you might find something. But that's a crapshoot because they charge you $30 and they send you whatever they got. It might be
I just ordered it and I got 2 pages.
2 pages. There you go.
$50.
Yeah. 50 now?
Electronically, if you send it.
That's it for you, Brian.
Well, before COVID, I asked for, I sent them $30 for a record. COVID came and went. They do not reply to my email. They kept my money. Nasty federal government archivists.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Did you go back to the sharpshooter?
No. What do you need?
Dates.
Dates?
Dates at Petersburg to the campus.
Oh, that's when they first got to Petersburg. When they first got to Petersburg, and they had initial success, and they were going to take the Dimmock line, but they weren't supported. I mean, it was a very thin line held by, I think, Beauregard. And they never got supported. They went in, kicked butt, took over the entrenchments, and were left to sit there. And then when they did come, idiots. So you got, let's see. Say this is the line, right? The sharpshooters are in here. The idiots who launched the counterattack are coming from here. The idiots who decided to support these guys launch an attack this way, and they're all just mauled because they're getting shot in the side. Morons. Anyway, no. There's just no end of them. All right, we talked about him. John Hiller, who was really Johann Jacob Hildinger, 26th Michigan, German. He ended up in Sunfield Township with his parents, and then he obviously took over the family farm and died in Sunfield. Russell Johnson was a shoemaker in Charlotte. Interesting as he gets. He was taken prisoner at Fort Sanders, which is Knoxville, which is when Longstreet tried to take Knoxville. Another brilliant move. Hubert Miller, what do we know about Hubert? He was a farmer in Williamston and Dinedale, farmer in Windsor Township, and moved to England. He must have had some money, but that is not a cheap tombstone. Alfred Petty. Alfred, kind of interesting that he was born here in Eaton Rapids, but they kind of lost track of him after Spotsylvania Courthouse. He was captured, held at Lynchburg, Andersonville, and Florence. His wife thought he was dead and started to get a pension. Well, that ceased when he showed up. When he was discharged from Detroit's Harper Hospital, which is another great, if you ever get to hear about the Harper Hospital, fantastic, just fantastic. what the state did for its returning veterans is an amazing thing. They built a whole hospital complex to take care of them. He built and ran the Petty House Hotel in Correctionville, Iowa. I wonder myself, Correction, and who stayed in the hotel? Before or after sentencing? Elijah Sanders, 20th Michigan.
All right.
Are you applauding for Elijah or the 20th Michigan?
For Elijah. I ran across a letter where a young woman is describing the men coming back to Eaton County who've been prisoners at Andersonville, and she says how terrible they look, except for Elijah P. Sanders, who looks just great. And notice that he was an older man too, but somehow he survived Andersonville, had no problems whatsoever. And in John Ransom's diary at the very end, he mentions how run down years later in health all the prisoners were, right, except for Elijah P. Sanders of Lansing. He said he was just fine.
Okay, I'm going to tell you this story because I find it just utterly fascinating. The U.S. Postal Service during the Civil War worked all the way to Andersonville. You could write a letter to your loved one at Andersonville and they would get it. They would get it. The U.S. Postal Service had regular mail exchanges through the line.
How about care packages then?
I'm getting to that. There's a guy in Berrien County whose parents owned a fruit orchard, and they sent him strawberries and peaches, whatever was in season. He would get a care package. What he would do with that, he would take them, bake them into little pies, and sell them for whatever he could get from everybody else. Well, he didn't get scurvy. He didn't get berry, but the rest of them did because they were eating rice and corn cobs. Yep. So there are little success stories to be had at Andersonville, and it's not always going and feeding somebody up who's too sick to eat their food and taking their food, but there was a lot of that going on. But I don't know about Elijah. I don't know how he survived well. It could very well be, if he showed up at Andersonville with his pockets full of money. Because in Virginia, in the early part of the war, if you showed up with anything, they took it all away from you. Took everything. Took your socks, took your shoes, took everything. Andersonville, at the end of the war, there's one New York regiment showed up. They were taken prisoner after payday. And they showed up just stuffed with greenbacks. So you're at Andersonville, and there's sewage coming out of the slough house for you to eat. However, down by the creek, there's a row of shanty buildings. And in those shanty buildings are all the farmers from the neighboring area selling other food. And they're selling it for greenbacks only. They won't take Confederate script because they know it's worthless. They won't sell their food to the commandant because he's giving them Confederate script. But they'll set up shop inside of Andersonville to sell their good food to the people who have the money. And one guy, I can't remember who he is, but he sold the buttons off his coat to the guard enough to buy rice so that he didn't have to eat the horrible corn cob crap. So he was eating rice and stayed relatively healthy. But, that guy, whoever he was, is lost in my brain. But the guy from Berrien County, whose parents sent him fruit, that's just an amazing story to me. Well, right up the street from Andersonville was Macon, Georgia. And in Macon, Georgia, there was an old fairground called Camp Oglethorpe. Camp Oglethorpe was the prison camp where the early POWs went from, like Shiloh. I followed guys from the 12th Michigan at Shiloh, taken prisoner, went to Camp Oglethorpe. Well, Camp Oglethorpe was empty in early 1863, but then it was started up. Once Sherman's men started being captured in Georgia, they opened it back up for officers only. Story, this is not a bad place to be, guys. This is not a bad place to be. The ladies of Macon brought them mattresses and brought them things to eat and brought them clothing And more often than not, brought them themselves because there were no men in town. Lots of marriages happened after the war between POWs and Jamaican girls. But the thing about the officer prison is that officers were 90% rich people. You didn't get to be an officer if you were poor. You had to have connection. You had to be a lawyer. Your dad had to be a judge. Something going on.
Well, you got battlefield commissions where they prove themselves in battle, though.
I know, but what I'm saying is that these people had money. So they were targets of the local women who had no men because they were all off the war. They're targeting the prisoners of war. Anyway, a little sidelight for over. To which, by the way, I was in Macon many a time talking to people about Camp Oglethorpe, and there's two groups of people, historians in Macon. There are the public historians who are mostly all black, and then there are private historians who are mostly all white. The white part historians don't want to talk about Camp Oglethorpe at all because of all the marriages. They just do not want to talk about it. The black historians do not want to talk about Camp Oglethorpe because it sets off the crackers in the neighborhood whenever they talk about the Civil War. So I'm down there trying to find out all this stuff, and they're just saying, no, we're not doing it. Come on, you got to have something. And finally, I got through. Her name was Maureen. I finally got through to her. I was on the good side of the war. I wasn't a cracker trying to set everything up. I was on the winning side. I was the one. That's me. And she finally gave in and started showing me all this stuff. It was just, don't look now, but there are 200 guys on a train headed your way. Prisoners of war. I can't take care of them. So they had like half a day to put that fairground stockade up to get. All right, one more. I'm in Macon. I'm looking at where the Camp Oglethorpe was. And I know there was a cemetery right next door. At first, they took the dead POWs to the city cemetery, but I guess the people in Macon didn't like that. So they built their own cemetery right next door. So I'm down there trying to get into what is now a train yard. Okay, very busy train yard. So I go to the giant 14-story place where all the guys look out on all the trains. And I'm going, I need to talk to whoever's in charge. And so I see the general manager. Where's he? Top floor. Where's the elevator? Don't got one. So I walk all the way up there. I get there and I get inside and said, I would like to get into where the prison camp was and where the cemetery was. I got a feeling that there are places in that cemetery where there are indentations in the ground. I know exactly where it is because there was a creek that ran between the two, and I know where that creek is, just off 7th Street. So I say this to him, and he looks at me and goes, What camp? What are you talking about? So I had to tell him, that there was a prisoner of war camp on his land, and there was a cemetery there, and in 1867 they came to them all to Andersonville. And he said, okay, you can go in. I said, well, I know I can go in because the gate's unlocked, but I didn't want to trust him. And he said, well, that's a good idea. Thanks for coming. I'll let you in at 3 o'clock. It's like 2:15. What's with 3 o'clock? The gate's open now. He goes, yeah, but I want you to tell my first shift workers what you just told me about this prisoner of war camp that we didn't know existed. So I ended up teaching school to the first shift and half the second shifters, but when they heard something was going on, they all came in too. I ended up telling them all about the history that they worked on top of every day. I had no idea. And I did get in there and I did find a lot of depressions. I think there's still bodies there. But I had forgotten my ground penetrating sonar, so I couldn't go. Anyway, enough. It's been a fun ride. It really has. Yeah, it's been a fun ride since about 2011 when I started this chase, and it never ends. And Chris and I were just talking about this. You don't ever answer anything, you just get more questions. That's all happens. You just get more questions. All right, let's get Charles Sutherland here. He was in the sharpshooter. He was taken at Petersburg on that same day into the trenches and then left. He was held at Andersonville, but was then transferred to Salisbury prison in North Carolina, and he's buried in a trench grave there because at Salisbury and Florence, they just opened up a trench and threw bodies in. Mason Sutherland, farmer in Oneida, he was taken to POW Foster Springs Church, sent to camp for parole and died there of diarrhea and scurvy. National Cemetery. Theodore Whipple, Brookfield Township, and he died in Hamlin Township. He was also taken at the crater. Okay, how many have seen the American History Channel Battle of the Crater? Have any of you seen it? You remember an intern from another part talking about what happened at the crater. He said that white officers who were in charge of black troops, when they realized they were going to get captured at the crater, started slaughtering their own troops. That's what he said. Now, I can't find that anywhere else, anywhere. I've never heard of it anywhere. And I've looked at some pretty unreliable sources. And if this had really happened, if this had really happened, somebody would have brought it up. And I think the American History Channel really ought to be hung by their thumbs for letting that guy say that. Because there's just nothing. I know A. Will Green, he's written how many books now on Petersburg and the crater. I asked Ken about it. He said, "This is bull. This is just bull. How does it get on television?" How about the Shiloh one? Oh, it was about Grant. Did anyone watch the one on Grant? The very first thing that every promo they did for what they showed you, they showed the guy getting shot in their tent. That is BS. That battle started at 5 in the morning and was raging. Nobody could have slept through it. By the time the Confederates got to the Union tents, if you were sleeping there, you were comatose. Because there was a battle raging over. Enough. Bad history, bad history. Anyway, we're done. That's the book. 511 pages, 1,158 biographies, 145 photographs, quick battle summaries, statistics for residents. I think I just started Arlo Guthrie. I think it just went into Arlo Guthrie. On the group building page, anyway, that's what all you get. I was going to sell it for $40 and give them to the museum, but then I realized I just drove all the way from Mishawaka to lose money. I'm making $5. Anyway, guys, thank you. Questions? It's still daylight.
I heard a lot of people talking before the presentation tonight that they had ancestors in Andersonville. Who did? That's crazy.
Were they Michigan? What? No. They weren't from Eaton County. No. They're still in England. And I'm going to tell you this now that everybody bought a book that wants one, the book's upstairs. So you can go upstairs and look up your ancestors.
It's been on display here since I can remember.
2017.
I think it's actually written on birch bark, the one we've got.
No, that's the earlier one about.
Oh.
You've got two.
We've got the revised edition.
No, the first one was about the people who were still at it.
Oh.
The second one is about you.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, you got dead people.
Well, John drove like 2.5 hours tonight to give us his presentation. He's got a long drive home. And we appreciate everybody being here tonight. I've enjoyed his presentation immensely. Let me read over here real quick. And typically what we do is we present a certificate of appreciation to anybody who puts on a presentation. John's Life After Andersonville presentation and a quote that we like to read. If other eyes grow dull and other hands slack and other hearts hold in solemn trust, ours shall keep it well as long as the warmth and light of life remains to us. And it's on us to remember this stuff and teach this stuff. That's the only way that it continues. Thank you. The upstairs stairs will be open for tours if anybody wants to take a look up there. Like I said earlier, is where the veterans met.
Hey, come back for Matt Van Acker.
Yep.
Come back for Matt.
He's on the schedule later this year.